Welcome to the Halo Effect, hospitality stories with Ashley and Michael Donald. Hospitality isn't just our profession, it's our passion. With decades of experience and countless stories to share, we've navigated the highs and lows of this dynamic industry, not just as professionals, but as a husband and wife team tackling the challenges of business and life together. This podcast is your invitation to step behind the curtain of the hospitality world. We'll share real experiences, lessons learned, and the moments that have shaped our journey, offering inspiration and insights for anyone walking a similar path. Whether you're just starting out or have years under your belt, we're here to remind you that every challenge is an opportunity and every story has the power to inspire. Delighted to be joined again with Dean Cruz. He featured in an episode with Graham Norris a couple of weeks ago in the Halo Effect. Please do listen to that episode. But here we are going to discuss in a little bit more detail mentorship, which is something that was very clear that Dean was very passionate about. Dean, thank you so much for coming back. Welcome back to the Halo Effect.
Nice to see you again. Pleasure to come back.
So we talked about your origin story, your superhero origin story a couple of weeks ago. A lot has happened since. I know you got an upfront view of Newcastle ending their 70-year wait for a domestic trophy in the Newcastle end at Wembley.
Yeah, absolutely.
But something else that came up in the last couple of weeks is a TV show called Adolescence. And I kind of brought up the responsibilities, obviously, that parents and teachers have for their pastoral care of children. But I thought it was really interesting to kind of look at that from the sort of responsibilities that employers have and mentors within the business. And I think it'd be really good to sort of talk about that a little bit further and really get your sort of view on the responsibilities that employers have in that. So maybe how is the hospitality industry so unique? It really seems to help a sort of people going into their sort of part-time and entry-level jobs. There's a sort of a huge percentage of young people coming into their careers via hospitality. So I'd love to get your opinion on that.
I mean, I think that in terms of that sort of, sometimes I think with the mentor stuff, and mentoring and managing that sort of pastoral side of the business, it feels a little bit like maybe over the last 20 years, that's something that's just naturally ebbed away. And I think that it almost becomes a separate title, if you like. One person's going to be the mentor, another team of people will provide pastoral support or something like that. Whereas I think maybe 20 years ago, it was just done. People would just say, Michael's come into the kitchen today. He looks like he's having a bad time. He's had no sleep. Is he struggling to get to work? What's going on? All that sort of stuff. Whereas now it would be a bit like, well, that's not really that department's responsibility. They need to pick that up with someone else. And I think that's a real step change and a real problem in my mind, because I think actually if you are committing most of your time, which anybody in hospitality would vouch for, if you're committing most of your time to a job and a role, there are going to be times when you find it a little bit tough or a little bit tricky, or you're having a bad week or a bad day or whatever. And I think that I really, really think that caring for people thing is so overlooked. I don't think you have to be fluffy about it. I don't think you need to be particularly over the top about it. I think you just need to be known as somebody who can be there, somebody who's reliable, somebody who supports you, somebody you can go to. And I think that's a lot of what it is. I don't think it's anything as tangible as saying we need a particular module or a scheme or a title or a tagline. I don't think it's that. I think it's the way you present yourself.
And where do you think it's come from? Where is that? Where did it change? Is it just the way the business of hospitality has changed? Is it sort of the influx of sort of bigger corporate branding, or is it something more than that? Is it a way that we've developed as people?
It's a bit of everything. I think you look at societal changes, around that sort of stuff, and I think there's loads of things you could pull on for that. I think that on a very basic level, in a hotel environment or a restaurant environment, I think that maybe some environments have been over managed and over corporate, if you like, and they've become to say, the pastoral side of the role, don't get involved in that, because that's not your place.
Sits somewhere else.
It sits with HR or something like that. And actually, I believe there's been a fear created around this sort of stuff to say, well, don't get involved in, or give advice to people on their problems in their life and things like that, just in case they take your advice and it all goes sour. And then we've got another problem. And I think that there's been a bit of fear created around that sort of stuff. And I think that,
an abundance of caution.
Absolutely. Yeah, way too much. And I think, I always talk to people about, I wouldn't say always, but I've spoke to people a lot about an experience that I had when I was younger. And I think this would never happen these days. And I think I always remember we had one of these sort of immersion days. You probably would have done it with your kids. I know I have with mine at school, where they go to learn about the school before they've actually started. And when I started secondary school, we had one of them, and it was in the summer. And at the time, the school had an outdoor pool, and we all jumped in the pool and dived in. And I smacked my face on the base of the pool. And one of the prefects, who was 18, would have been 17, 18, just yanked me out by the arm, blood all over my nose, just yanked me out by the arm, wiped my face with his hand, and then just rinsed his hand in the water and was like, "Get back in, mate, you'll be right." Yeah. That would never happen now. That would never happen. I would be in A&E or whatever, and he would have not touched me in case I sued him. And I think that sort of, it's almost friendship or caring or things like that. It's missing. And I think that part of the togetherness is missing. For me, all the most successful kitchens and hotel environments I've been in have got that in abundance. That care, that togetherness, that sort of feeling of being appreciated. And I'd like to think that when I was in that situation, when I was running a kitchen or multiple kitchens, I showed the guys in the team that if they're having a bad day because the cat's died or something, then you can talk to me about that as well. It's not just a case of make the bread, sort out the meat, finish the sauces. It's not just about that. And I think that you'll do your best work when you're in the best frame of mind. And people need to remember that. You do your worst work when you're at the lowest point. So we need to also make sure people are at their best, rather than just saying, doesn't matter, you're here to do a job.
So that's very much a workplace culture thing, and always, and I really recognise what you're talking about. Generally, that happens when there's a leader in place who is taking responsibility for everything, including the pastoral care, including everything else, but just they are in charge. I think often if you have a sort of a team where it's sort of no one's really sure what's going on and they're worried about what's gonna happen, maybe with the powers that be that aren't there, that's where it can get a little bit messier. But it's really key, and having, I think there's definitely a difference between, I mean, maybe it's now, maybe it wasn't always the case, because you mentioned that there was sort of people all in one who did everything, but now there seems to be there's mentorship on one side, and there's leader, hopefully inspirational leader. Yeah. But it can be quite a separate thing. My own experiences of mentorship, I kind of remember when I was first getting into hospitality, and I guess it was more inspirational leader. It was more about stories. It was more about that storytelling element and sharing experiences. And it wasn't always really positive stuff. Sometimes it was, I had this horrendous situation. I suggest you don't do this. One of my favorite learning moments, which I always remember and always sort of pass on as much as I can, was trying to book someone out of a hotel. Very early days, we're overbooked. We don't have the room. We need to book someone out. This is my room's experience. It is probably the worst thing you have to do or it's up there anyway, in the worst things you have to do, because you've promised someone that you're going to have a hotel room for them, and then they arrive and you have to tell them we don't. And my first sort of leader mentor that I had in hospitality, his name was Adrian Harkins, and he was telling a story about, just be really careful. I suggest you don't lie to them. And he shared an incredible story of where he was working in Adair Manor, which is one of the top hotels in the world in Ireland. And and I think he had lied to someone on their wedding night to say that there's a leak in the room. And of course, the guy says, "Oh, I'm a plumber."
Yeah.
It's like,
what are the chances?
And then he sort of forces himself into a situation where he has to run upstairs and throw a bucket of water in the middle of the carpet to kind of convince him that he was telling the truth. And the guy's like, "Can I see the room?" And obviously in that situation, then you're really stuck, and it's going to be obvious that you're lying, and you then lose trust. But it's sort of Adrian was both, I guess. He was my line manager, but he was also a mentor that I remembered stories, and I learned from them, and I shared those stories onwards. Now my thing is, don't make stuff up. Tell the truth. I mean, you don't have to tell the whole truth necessarily in every situation, but tell the truth. It's easier to remember the truth as well if someone's passing on situations and trying to communicate that to other people. But you don't have to remember every sort of white lie if you've told the truth all along. But are there? You spoke in the last episode about having quite a few mentors that really helped you with that, and sometimes they told you things that weren't necessarily what you would expect to hear. Like, you can have everything in the world, but you're going to have to leave, and if you don't, I'll fire you. That was one of your
and
I
think that's the thing. I think sometimes I do think, I don't know whether you agree, that sometimes the mentors that you have in your life, you only discover they were afterwards. You don't realise the profound effect they had until after these things have happened. And I think later in adult life, I've realised that actually these people probably shaped you a lot more than you realised. Mm-hmm. But I think that's great, because it means at the time there wasn't a sort of a hierarchy or there wasn't some sort of leadership challenge to say, don't speak to me about that, or don't approach me about that. So they've done their job really, really well. And I think that, one of my first mentors, I didn't realise until quite a number of years afterwards. And I think I spoke about him last time, and his name was Paul, and he'd lived the life of the sort of early 90s chef, the golden days, and he'd worked for Marco, and he'd worked for Nico Ladenis, and, he was good friends with the Roux family and all things like that. And he was working with us, and I was thinking, that means nothing to me. This guy would obsess about some lettuce. And I was a commie chef at the time, and I was thinking to myself, why is he so obsessed about lettuce? This makes no sense to me. What is wrong with him? I just couldn't work it out. And we became good friends, and we became mates and mentors. And he was always very much, as far as the food was concerned, really harsh, really harsh with me all the time, just black and white. And that softened slightly as we became friends, and I did some work with him in the 90s in Henley Regatta, and we did a lot of stuff around there, and that's when we became closer. Fast forward maybe another 15 years, and he was doing a sort of French import wholesale type role, and I had just got into the final of National Chef of the Year, and I said to him, I'd really love to cook my dish for you, Paul, to get some feedback, because at the time I was executive chef of 4 hotels. So everybody in the kitchen brigade was going to tell me it was nice because I'm the boss, right? Yeah. And so I'm cooking this dish, and I was thinking, this is unbelievable. I'm probably going to win, is what I was thinking. This is absolutely outrageous. And he came in, and I cooked it for him, and he said to me, it's just an embarrassment. I said, what do you mean? Wow. He said, it's terrible. He said, I think I've given you better advice than that in your life. You should know better. And I was distraught. And he told me in front of all of the team. And that was just his way. And that is his way. And he's very honest like that. And he just said to me, the sauce is slightly burnt, it's too thick, it's too this, it's too that. And it made me a lot better, and I didn't win, but it made me a lot better as a person, as a process, because of that. And I think with mentors, you have to know that you have to know the boundaries, and you have to know what's happening, who's going to say what, how's it going to work, how are you going to feel about it, etc., because that's just how it works.
I think that's really interesting, and he must have known you really well.
Very well, yeah.
To know that feedback was going to be constructive for you.
Yeah, I'll just accept it. It's fine.
On the surface, if if someone said that to a team, that any team I've ever been in, they could quit the industry and leave and blame that person or go straight to HR or whatever it might be. But I think really understanding the mentee is really crucial there, and it's one of those high risk maneuvers as well, isn't it?
Well, it's also I mean, bearing in mind that I've obviously softened the language for this conversation.
that was the polite version as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. But actually,
the golden age.
exactly right. The golden age of profanity, we'll call it.
Yeah.
But I think that in my mind, it also helped me twofold, because in my kitchen environment, with all of the brigade and the head chefs that I had and things like that, it made them realise that actually he's the boss and he can get some really negative feedback from somebody who he regards so highly, and it still makes things better. It's okay to do that. It's not a problem. And hopefully some of the guys that I worked with at some time would see me in that way as a mentor who advised them and gave them some really harsh, difficult feedback, but actually it made them better. It might not have made them better for being a chef. It might have made them better people. I don't know. But I think we all need a bit of that in our life. And I think it's just one of those things that you have to be prepared for, to accept, and you have to just acknowledge it. And, you know, it's no secret that in our business, you know, sometimes the feedback isn't done in a particularly sensitive way, you would call it. And there's loads of reasons for that, right? You know, people aren't trained, people don't know, people, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think that you've got to, if you want to be in that situation of absorbing a mentoring situation, if you want to absorb that information, you've got to be prepared to take it from source as they want to deliver it. You can't say, thanks for the feedback, Michael. Can you sanitize that and soften it for me because I don't like the words you used? That's just not how it works. And I think that you've got to be really, really prepared for that. And that's the bit that I think is maybe missing, because actually what people see on TV and in the media is harsh aggression and so on and so on and so on. You and I both know that that is exactly what, you know, that the industry can be like. But what nobody ever sees is at the end of service, someone putting their arm around you and going, it was a tough night tonight. You did as well as you could. Tomorrow, why don't you work on this? Good job. Well done. Go home. No one shows you that side of it.
Yeah, I've always sort of used the sort of metaphor of it's kind of almost like going into battle, isn't it? Going to war sometimes, and there's no time to kind of to sit back, and you need to effectively get your message out there as quickly as possible, and then you share your war stories, and you build up again, you go again. What skills, because one thing is really kind of coming out to me, it's kind of it is trust is going to be incredibly important, because you need to trust that he's giving this feedback to improve you, for the better. It's not for himself, it's for the team, it's for you, it's for everything. But what else, what skills do you need to have as a mentor? What do you need to sort of have to kind of effectively get your messaging across?
I mean, I think one of the key skills that you need, and I don't know whether you would categorize it as a skill particularly, but one trait that somebody needs, I think, is there's no driving force of self-gain in what they're doing. The driving force is for the gain of the individual or the business or whatever. And I think that a lot of the time, when somebody comes across as, you know, it's for self-gain, that's when mentoring falls apart. It only really works when it's about, how can I improve you? We are improving something together. We are going to battle together. We are doing it together. That's one trait that I think mentors need, because if I've seen hundreds of situations in environments where, let's say you do some great work for me, and it's really revolutionised the project in whatever way.
Yeah,
I've seen loads of situations where that happens, but the person who delivers it, who didn't do the great work, takes all of the glory for it. And that is so divisive. And I see it all the time in our business and in other businesses, of course. But you see it all the time, that the people who are actually developing and changing and doing something never get recognised. And I think it's the mentor's job to make sure they're recognised. And it's not about pay rises or positional changes or anything like that. It can just be about conversations to say, you know, and I think that, or even just giving them time to say, you know, I never have any time in my day, but, you know, Michael's done a great job, so tomorrow I'm going to spend 3 hours with him in showing him how to break down a lamb or something like that, because that's not something you would normally do. But do you know what? He's done a great job this week, and I really want to move him forward. And that trait, I think, is vital in mentors. It's not about self-gain. It's about, teaching and growing that person. And so many people, I think, who think they're mentors because they are in charge aren't. There's a big difference between being in charge and being a mentor. A big difference. Yeah. And I think that those people who believe they may be mentoring a team are actually just in charge of the team, because it's all about self-gain. It can't be about self-gain, because if it is, you're not mentoring people. You're just asking them to do tasks and taking the great things out of it for yourself. And I think that trait of lack of self-gain is so important.
How do you make sure that the team believes that that's what you're meaning to do? Because sometimes whatever you do can come across as, is this person just doing this for themselves, or are they really doing it for us? Because it feels like I'm in a rough place here.
I'm a big believer in sort of that macro thing around the individual. So some individuals that I've worked with, you have to approach them in a different way to the next guy or girl that you're working with, and that's just life. And I think I'm a huge believer in what levers do you need to pull to elevate that person to the next level. And part of that can be, what feedback or appreciation do you need to give them to make them feel great, to move them forward, and so on and so on. And I think that's what needs to happen. That sort of, because some people will say, if you take sports, for example, some people will say, well, the guy who scores the goal, he's the linchpin of the team. He's everything. Yep. Now, some people would say, well, that's really, really not the case. But managing it successfully is about individuals and what they need. Do you get what I mean? And I think I've been in kitchens, quite a lot of kitchens, where a lot of the people in the kitchen need screaming and shouting at. That's the way that they work. They need that, and they need that. Other people need really direct, almost binary communication to say, put that there, that goes there, do that there. They need that as well. And I think it's a bit of appreciation around that sort of stuff. And we always used to, certainly going back to some of the London restaurants that I worked in, if you've got a chef's table in and the customers want to go round and they say, Dean's the saucier today, he's done a great job, and the guests might go, the sauce is fantastic, brilliant, and then you move on. That's what some people need. So I actually think that, managing at a micro level, it's hard to do with big teams, but managing at a micro level about individuals is hugely important. You can't just have a view of all the people in my team are the same. If they don't get on the bus, they're no good. That's the real wrong way to look at it. And that's why I feel hospitality is suffering a little bit, because a lot of people are saying, here's the bus, get on the bus. If you can't, you're out. And by the way, in my view, the bus isn't about the standards. That's a separate conversation. The bus is about the vision, the idea, where we want to go, what we want to do. That's what it's about. And if you want to get on that, then fine. But if you look at silly things like people who have won Chef Mentor Awards, they all share the same qualities, all of them. Yeah. And I think that's not by accident.
So obviously then there's a lot of responsibility is on the mentor to lead this dance. But from a mentee perspective, what would you recommend to people, young people, older people, whatever age, to find the best mentors for them? Is there a skill to that as well?
I mean, I think that from my own experience, find somebody who you're intrigued by, fascinated by, that really has got something that nobody else has got, in your opinion. Find that. Find somebody you can trust. And by trust, I mean somebody you can trust with information about yourself, things that have gone well, things that have gone badly. Find that person who isn't going to use that information to, dare I say, exploit you. And by exploitation, I mean, in terms of you're not going to get promoted because I know that he can't commit because of time or whatever. Find that person that you trust. I would say look for somebody who's got experience. Whichever way you skin it, experience is important. It is. And
I guess the right kind of experience as well. Experience that, as you say, intrigues you.
Exactly.
It's always sort of something. If someone's worked for a particular hotel or another chef or a particular place that they've worked, you go, ooh,
and you can't choose that. That's not up to you. That in terms of the mentor, that's not up to you. You either fit their profile or you don't. And when I really viewed Paul in that way, it was because he had strong butchery experience. He was amazing at presentation. He'd worked for some of the greatest chefs of the decade, and I thought, yeah, that suits me fine. He wasn't a guy who's going to do a function for 500. He wasn't that guy. And he just would never be, and he never has been. But he was the guy who had all these links to all these things, and I thought, this is fascinating. And, my other mentor, James, he was a guy who I could ask him anything about cooking from the last 30 years, and he could tell me anything. He could tell me how to make anything without a recipe. I was fascinated by encyclopedic knowledge and how I get encyclopedic knowledge. I was fascinated by that. And I think you need to find a trait that's fascinating in somebody who you really trust, who really works for you. That's how you approach it. And I do think that it isn't always your boss. It isn't always your line manager. And it isn't always somebody, in the kitchen. And I think that, I think even it can be really early doors. I think back to even at school, I had a games teacher at school who I wouldn't say is a mentor, but he sort of had an effect on me in the way that he was quite standards driven, quite serious, quite sort of, he was the same with everybody. He was balanced with everybody, which is something that I never saw with other teachers. He was very balanced, I think he had a forces background and he was very balanced, organised, motivational, the same, keen on interest, keen on developing people. In a rugby environment, he might say, oh, you're 12 years old, you're the biggest guy here, so you're going to go and play there. You're the smallest guy here, but you've still got a place and you're going to go and play there. Do you get what I mean? It's all about the individuals and the people and maximising. So I think in terms of finding somebody, you need to find somebody who's got those things that really make you tick.
And that could be, and as you've just demonstrated, that could be, you're almost building a recipe for your own way of dealing with things. You're taking different kind of experiences that you've had with different mentors, different leaders, different situations, and you're pulling together what you like, what really intrigues you, and maybe getting rid of some of the other stuff that maybe didn't appeal, because no one's perfect, and certainly no one's going to do things exactly how you feel is best for you. It all really feels so similar to parenting in so many ways, doesn't it?
Yes.
Especially when you were saying, you don't necessarily at the time appreciate everything. That we hear there's that the parenting you're with your kids all the time up to a certain age, and then a little bit less, and then they sort of move out, and then it's even less, and then when you become a parent yourself, you realize so much more about what their experience might have been. And I suppose when you become a mentor yourself, it's similar. You sort of see it from other angles, and you understand a little bit better.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I do feel quite a lot of mentors, some of them do share a sort of big brother sister parental quality. They do. There's a bit of an empathy about that, and I do think, in my experience, people who have got siblings, who they're close to age-wise and things like that, they generally make good mentors because they've experienced the sort of togetherness and experienced the sort of hierarchy in a social environment, I suppose. And I do think that I know quite a few people who are in that situation where they've been siblings and gone on to be great mentors, because I think that you understand something, you understand how people tick, and it isn't just about gain. Because when you're the big brother or sister, you're not gaining anything really, are you? You're not. You're just being at home with your mum and dad or whatever. So, but I think you are right. There's definitely some correlation between parenting and sort of successful mentors.
Definitely. In the conversation we had with Noreen Ahmed from Inspiring Women in Hospitality, something that really came up that I thought was interesting, and it talks about sort of that sort of networking, that kind of that mentorship, networking, introduction, and sponsorship. One of the most important things really from building these relationships is then maybe the introductions that might happen, the next step.
Yeah.
You spoke in the last episode, you talked about mentors that gave you the opportunity to take sabbaticals and go and work for chefs so you could really improve your knowledge. Now, speaking to Noreen, there's a sort of a bit of a diversity issue in that sort of sponsorship level, because of the diversity at maybe leadership levels in different hotels and different industries. But in particular to sponsorship, we sort of defining that as what you say about people when they're not in the room. You know, we say nice things about people when they're right there, but what we talk about, and it's almost like the next level of mentorship where you really go out and you sponsor and you tell people that this person is great. What is your experience of that? How have you sort of seen that work well, or maybe not as effectively as it could do? And because so many people want to hold on to their team members, especially the good ones, don't they? But at the same time, they want to make sure that they go out and explore the world and develop themselves as well.
I mean, I from my own experience, I think that there are an awful lot of unofficial sponsorship situations that happen, particularly in the London restaurant scene, in my own experience. And, you know, I've had, you know, over a decade of experience in that world. And I think that the sponsorship of people and the talking up of people happens very, very regularly, I would say, very, very regularly. And I first saw it, particularly myself, when, I suppose the first time would have been in the sort of the Gordon Ramsay group, and it would have been around the time when I worked at Claridge's, he had Maze and he had the Connaught, and they're all geographically within a stone's throw of each other, right? So it could be, you know, the talking up of people in that situation happened an awful lot. Of it's like, oh, you know, Michael's fantastic on the garnish, Angela's short at the Connaught. Michael, can you go to the Connaught? Next thing you know, Michael's gone down very well there. He's been promoted. He's got a new role, and the guys at Claridge's go, well done, Michael. Off you go. And I think that I saw that happen an awful lot. What happens sometimes is that that's seen as a sticking plaster rather than an improvement. And I think that that's
solving a problem they have.
You're solving a problem. Yeah, you're the grey man who just goes in, solves a problem for the night, and then you go back. When actually I saw that as a really, really positive environment that they'd created to say, well, he's you know, given a good account of himself today. He's really presented himself well today. Crack on, you know. And I do see in the London restaurant scene that happening an awful lot. You will see it with mid-level chef de partie, sous chef, pastry chef. You'll see it an awful lot where they'll go, does anyone know a good pastry chef? Even if you're down the pub and you meet some other chef, does anyone know a good pastry chef? I'm looking, oh yeah, I know this guy, he's brilliant, whatever. You see it an awful lot. Unfortunately, outside of the London scene, I don't see it happen that often, because I think there's a lot more shortage of personnel, so therefore we break our necks to hang on to everybody, and we're really annoyed if they leave. And I think there's an awful lot of that. I think we need to try and return to that, because I think, you know, going back to my experience that I told you about last time with James, when he said to me, if you don't leave, I'm going to fire you. And he's talking up all of these places to me, and he's like, you know, and I left there and went to work at Lauterland, and he said, oh, you know, Alan's a fantastic chef, Berkshire's a great place to be, go and live there, go and work there, get on with it. And that was a case of, you know, not him sponsoring me, but you know, he's moving me forward. Okay, he's going to be one team member short. His head chef's just left, but it's fine, you know. And I think that we need to do a lot more of that in terms of sponsorship. And I think that, you know, it happens in all the industries. And I think that my mother-in-law is retired now, but she is a big believer in this sort of sponsorship situation around really guaranteeing you time, putting time into people to say, I've committed 4 hours a week. If she says to me, oh, I've committed 4 hours a week to Ashley to improve her presence in the education sector, I know by hook or by crook, she's given Ashley 4 hours a week, and she will make sure she improves over a year period. That is an objective. That's a guarantee. When I think sometimes people see sponsorship and it almost becomes, you know, I don't want to be down on HR, but a HR term that can be seen as a bit like a hospital pass, where people are going, oh, if I have to. If you want me to do it, if you're forcing me to do it, then fine, you know. And I think, you know, you may have been in the industry at a time when people started using terms like a buddy. You know, you're starting today, and your buddy for 4 weeks is going to be whoever. That buddying thing, I think, it ended up becoming that sort of poison chalice thing where it's like, oh, if I have to. But some of the people are like, well, it just means that I've got to carry somebody for 4 weeks and I'm getting paid the same money. And people saw it that way, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, and and I think that's often where things do go wrong, because if you find out that maybe it hasn't worked out well, you maybe haven't hired the right person, or alternatively you've not buddied them with the right person, and they get a bad experience in the onboarding experience, and they haven't had that sort of senior leadership access, and then maybe haven't invested enough in training, not let alone the onboarding section. It's almost like, here you go, good luck, sink or swim kind of
absolutely.
kind of a situation, and ultimately the buddy, whoever is looking after them, is trying to look out for themselves as well, so they're not going to
they don't want to get in trouble themselves as well. And I think it's one of those, you just think about the way that sort of stuff moves on. It's like mistakes, when actually, if you do it right in the beginning and don't force it upon people, I think that's actually is really, really good. And there's a lot to be said for onboarding, and when people arrive in jobs and all of that sort of stuff, get the right arrival. And so often I think that people are put into jobs where they sort of say, oh, welcome, I've got 60 in for dinner tonight, all I want you to do is stand there and listen. That's not really helping anyone, is it?
Yeah.
It's what are they there for? What value do they present? Stand there and listen to what am I listening for? Listening to the orders? Am I watching the kitchen? And it's you look at the micro level. I went for a week or so with Jason Atherton, and I was going to work at one of his restaurants back in 2013, and it never really happened in the end because of my decision. But actually, I remember one of the days I was with him at Pollen Street, and I sort of said, "Oh, chef, do you mind if I stand, with a pass and watch you?" Now, in my mind, I expected the answer to be no, get out of my way. But actually, he was like, "Of course you can, no problem, just stand there." And as he's plating the food, and a busy lunch, of 80, 90, whatever, he's talking to me about that's for that, that's for that, that's that, we're doing that with that, that's that. And I thought he was going to do that for one dish, but he did it for all the dishes. And you think, that is an unrequired investment in somebody else. He doesn't need to do that, and to be honest, it's probably a bit of a pain for him to do it. But he did it, and I walked away thinking, wow, this guy, I didn't ask him for that, I just wanted to stand and watch. But actually...
But I bet it's not the only time he's ever done it, though.
Well,
exactly. I would imagine there's a culture in there where he's doing that quite regularly to members of the team, to kind of really give them a taste of what it's like on the front line, and which is really brilliant. Interesting.
And that sort of stuff is what you need. It moves you forward, and that's what I think is really, really important. So, I think in terms of that sponsorship thing, though, going back to what you're just saying around, I'd love to see a lot more of it where we allow our employees time to invest in our employees as an industry. If we say, I know Wednesday afternoon, Dean's got 2 hours and he needs to spend it with, Dave, the commie chef or whatever, allow him to do that. Don't run into that time with meetings. Don't run into that time with other things. Don't make them feel guilty for doing it, because I'm always of the view, if we all do a little bit of this, everything will improve. If all of us do nothing, it's only going to get worse. And that's essentially where I'm at with it. Invest a bit of time. And if it means that I don't have a break in that afternoon and I spend 3 hours with a pastry chef showing them how to make bread properly, great. We all win. So we've got to move on and allow that to happen.
Yeah. It's really interesting. The onboarding piece and how much time we invest in it. Obviously, a lot of things have changed in the last few years. We have a lot less sort of EU unskilled, I'm in inverted commas here, which you won't hear on unskilled workers. So in the past, there was a lot more options for young people looking to kind of have their first roles in hospitality, maybe from all over the EU. We also have the NI thresholds having changed. There's that sort of level of employee has been hit more percentage wise than full-time employees. So it's going to cost a little bit more than it ever did in the past. So there have been changes that have made these kind of roles a bit more expensive and harder to find. So it certainly makes sense that a lot of industries will be doing more to encourage retention, holding on to people as they come on. But a huge part of that is going to be that onboarding process. And I suppose, I mean, how can industries help connect people with these potential mentors, the people who are going to intrigue them? How the more they can do that at early stage and really grab their attention, that's going to be really helpful. It's
I mean, it's not for everybody, but if you think of, you know, the competition circuit in the chef world, for example, the people generally who exist in that world in terms of the competitions, they're in the jobs that they've had for an awful long time. And one of the reasons is the boss or the whoever is allowing them to practice and dedicate time to something that is an investment in them. And they're allowing them the time to practice a dish and do these things, and it's an investment in them. You know, looking at it from a business point of view, and, you know, looking at myself as a business owner, I just think, well, you know, it's not a lot of money. It's not really, but you're investing in their time to say, we're investing in you, improving you. Most of the time, the retention in those companies is incredible. People don't leave. It's not because they get paid more. It's not because their work life is easier. It's not because their hours are easier. It's because they feel like they're being invested in, and we don't do that. You know, you look at situations in all parts of life at the minute where people are sort of going, oh, you know, we're not providing staff food because you've only done 4 hours. I mean, really? You know, this is a hospitality business. That shouldn't be a conversation. If Michael comes to work and he's hungry, let him have a sandwich. No dramas. You know, and I think we've become so focused on numbers and all of that sort of stuff that we forgot that a bit of dedication to human beings pays dividends. It pays more than numbers sometimes. So, yeah, I would say that, you know, a lot of that stuff in terms of, you know, how we approach people and onboarding needs to be done as a process with the department that's doing it. Onboarding shouldn't be, you know, a document that comes from HR that somebody gets and goes, oh God, I've got to do this. It shouldn't be that, but it's become that.
It's not a great way to have your first day, is it?
No, no.
When it's like that, it's not what you sort of look forward to when you had the interview and when you get your first day clothes on and get ready and all ready to go in, and then boom, here's a 100-page document.
Yeah,
Enjoy
that.
A little bit more. Yeah, it's there's no doubt it's a challenging industry for everyone, but when you can have those sort of moments that really inspire you and intrigue you, it makes a big difference. But are there things that hospitality can learn from other industries? Or, I mean, you gave a few really good examples there where hospitality is probably teaching other industries good things.
I mean, that togetherness, I think, you know, we can talk about something that, you know, seems to have been in both of our lives a lot recently. If you look at football, and, you know, if I look at Liverpool, for example, under Klopp, you could argue that quite a lot of the talent that came into the club over his tenure wasn't the greatest in the world. But the togetherness and the investment in these people and the faith that they showed each other and the respect that they showed each other meant that they won a lot. When they maybe shouldn't have. There were better teams in the league at the times when they won things. And I do think that is a real key point, that's about a cultural investment in people. You know, how do we learn about these things moving forward? And some people will be money motivated. Some people will be work-life balance motivated. Some people will be, I want to be famous motivated. So it depends what people really, really want. But I think that we can learn an awful lot as an industry from other industries, because the view in hospitality generally has been, for too long, maybe for the last 10 years or so, well, Michael just wants more money, or this one wants more money, or he wants 10p more an hour, or he wants 50p more an hour. And quite a lot of the time operators have buckled under that and given it to them. And you've almost ended up with a generation of people who are, dare I say it, over promoted. And I don't like saying that because it feels like they're not worthy, or I'm saying they're not worthy and they might do a great job. But I don't mean it like that. What I mean is that they haven't been given the skills, all the skills, to do the job properly. And if I look at how, just going back to my original analogy, if I look at how Klopp used to bring players into the team, you wouldn't get 90 minutes when you started. They might bring you on at 60 minutes and ease you in slowly to see how you got on, to see what happened, to improve you slightly. And then you might start 6 games and then don't start another 2. And that situation around sort of bedding people in and, moving people forward, it isn't a luxury. A lot of people will say, oh, yeah, it's easy to say that when you've got loads of staff. Well, it isn't a luxury. You just got to approach it in a different way. And I think that we are maybe approaching these things in the wrong way. And we've ended up in situations, I think, I've seen them all loads in the last 10 years, where people are doing jobs that the base element of the job, as in cooking or reception or security or leisure club, the base element of the job they might be very skilled and experienced in. The peripheral elements of the job that are as important, they have no experience in. Leadership, culture, managing people, tone, conduct, management experience. They have no experience in. So you end up with somebody who's really experienced in the core. They're the greatest striker in the team, but they're not a team player. They've got really poor culture. They don't work with other people. That is a ticking time bomb. You can have a lot of faith in them because one day they might hit a 30-yard shot that goes in the top corner. But that's probably going to be scarce. That certainly can't mask over all of the problems. And I think other industries wouldn't generally allow that to happen. You've got to be consistently good. You might not be a superstar every day of the week, but consistently the same and consistently performing it. And I think that sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we're in a situation where we say, Michael's had 3 good weeks and he's got, 10 weeks of great sales. Let's promote Michael. Yeah, but Michael doesn't want to manage people. He doesn't want to manage a team.
And hasn't been trained to manage people.
Yeah, you can't just say, by the way, off you go and manage a team. Oh, I don't know how to manage a team. I don't know how to talk to people. I don't know how to set targets. I don't know how to motivate people. I have no idea. Oh, give Michael the intranet where he can sign into a course and learn how to manage people. Oh, great. That's not good enough either. So I think that we've got lost in this view quite a lot in the last few years. It's
often... Well, because let's be honest, a lot of those entry level roles are at minimum wage. That's often the case, and sometimes it's minimum wage for under 18. So it's often seen as a way to give them a little bit more money, is to get them into the supervisor structure and more responsibility in that sense. And it's a way of working through those sort of pay structures, I suppose.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. There's very little guidance on how to be a great leader or how to be a great mentor within that, and that hands-on experience of leading a team and getting the most out of them is generally, again, just becomes do the best you can, and eventually you'll get this role and I'll get the role above me and we'll all move up together. When people move on. And also I think to an extent that kind of, when you talk about that sponsorship and chefs moving, I think there's a sort of a very clear understanding within hospitality that if you move and you go for your next role, there'll be a little bit more money involved. You keep on doing that, and if you do that every few years, you'll make a little bit more. But there aren't those same sort of opportunities when you talk as sort of in outside of London. That might not always be the case, so that the actual culture, workplace culture that you have within the business is kind of the key point. And there's still, so with all the other costs going on outside of wages, there is no doubt that prices will with that increase for customers, and I know that's something that the industry is just very, very cautious about, because people are making other choices. But I
don't know about you, but I think that we need to be, general public needs to be aware that if you want to go out for an experience, it's going to cost money, because we need to pay people in that experience. And I understand, cost of living and things like that, but if I go to McDonald's and it's whatever it is, however, I don't know how much a McDonald's is, but let's say it's £5 for a burger. If that burger is £5, it's going to taste like £5. And the service you get, all right, mate, what do you want? Here's your burger. See you later. That's worth £5. That's the way it goes, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you go out for lunch and somebody is taking your coat, and while you're having lunch, they're dry cleaning and ironing your coat, and, that's worth £200, or whatever the numbers may be. And I think that sometimes in hospitality, we almost want to have a base level to say, well, I'm not paying more than £25 for a main course. Why? Main course is how long's a piece of string? It could be £10, it could be £60. It doesn't. It means that it's connected to loads and loads of other parts of the journey, and I think that we've got to be aware of that, because that extra money is paying for the staff and the service that you're getting and all of the things. And what I see quite often is that, we went for lunch yesterday for Mother's Day, and it felt like it's a nice establishment, and it felt like there was 2 or 3 maybe experienced people, and then about 10 kids who were just there, and silly things like they would say, they'd turn up at the table and go, "Who's having the meringue?" You're like, well, because there's only 3 of us, and one of them is a child, so it's only between 2, really. It's not. And it's one of those situations where, but I'm less harsh on those situations these days, because I think if they haven't been shown and they've not been exposed to that world, how would they know?
Yeah.
And
it's not. It isn't their fault, is it?
No, of course it's not. It's nothing
not
to do with them. You
it's
and
their
I,
buddies.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's the buddy system that's broken. And if you and I went into a situation of like, okay, we're going to go and be concierge for the day in a 5-star hotel in central London, I'm pretty sure we could both do a very good job. Not because we've been concierges in our life, but because we understand that opening doors for people is part of the conversation. That saying hello, saying goodbye, what have you done that's part of it. If you've never been experienced in that world, how would you know any of those things? You wouldn't. If you just wouldn't.
When I worked at the Goring, Jeremy Goring started up the hotel school, the charity that they were doing there, and still do, and it's just so fascinating and so amazing to help out people who were maybe coming into the workplace for the first time in their, maybe they've been homeless for a while and whatever, and people would start on the first day of school, first day of work, and they wouldn't know how to tie a tie.
Exactly.
Simple things. And it's very easy. What, you don't know how to tie a tie? There was none of that in the Goring. We took the time. We showed them a few different knots, and we prefer the half Windsors in this hotel or whatever it might be, and show them a few things. But understanding that if you get those basics right, your employees will be able to speak to people.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if they can, yes, everyone will come across a situation where they don't know what the answer is, right? If they're with a guest, everyone will. The head concierge will come across a question being asked by someone, and they have no idea what the answer is. But they can always find out the answer, right? But the way you react and the way you deal with certain things is more important, because we talk about that. We talked about that in our last episode of the Halo Effect. We talked about how the difference between service and experience, and the Maya Angelou quote of people won't remember what you say, but they always remember how you made them feel. And that doesn't come from how you answer every individual question. That comes from, or what you specifically say, but it's the way you interact with people, and that is what starts making value rather than cost. There's obviously a big difference. You talk about having a £600 or £200 meal or whatever it might be. That could be great value, or it could be a ripoff. And just like the £5 burger, that could be great value, or it could be a ripoff, no matter what it is. Because you could, that burger could have been really, really badly made, or it could be pretty okay. For £5. But that's one of the things that really puts me off is where I can't see the value in something, and that's where I don't go back. If I just won't go back as a customer, I won't go back. But also, I think as an employee, if I'm working for somewhere where I don't see what the draw to a guest might be, then I don't think I'd want to work for the hotel, and it has to do with those shared values and understanding what it is that clientele will
But
appreciate.
you speak about somewhere like the Goring, and most people in the industry would probably say, or most of the people I know would probably say, that is a very sort of supportive, homely, excellence-driven hotel, standards, etc., etc., etc. And I think there's a real investment in people and what goes on and the industry and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people like that, and I think that they're not spoken about enough. It's easy to talk about the famous people in the industry, of course, but there's not enough spoken about the people who are. I don't like the word unsung hero or the phrase, because I think actually, who defines a hero and who defines unsung? You know what I mean? And but there's an awful lot of people like that. If you look at somebody like Phil Howard, most people in the industry that I know, from F&B directors to business owners to Michelin star chefs to everybody who I would speak to, would say he is in that category of being a stalwart. He's trained, he's mentored, he's invested in people. He doesn't want to be famous. I mean, he is, but he doesn't want. That's not his driver. His driver is the industry, the food, the passion, the quality, the products, and things like that. And there's a lot of that goes on that's not spoken about enough, because actually that's what you're trying to get access to. There's too much of sort of, I want to be famous, unfortunately, and
yeah,
it's the same with your 15-year-old kid who's, a striker for the under 21s. He wants to be Ronaldo. Well, I'm sorry, but that is not for everybody. And I think that we've all been there. I know I certainly have. There was a point in time when I was like, I'm going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then you realise...
Footballer or chef?
No, chef. Definitely not footballer. But you go through that phase. And I think you probably have to go through that phase to realise you're not all that. You might be good, but you're not. And go and be humbled. Go and work with somebody who is all that. And then you'll realise, well, actually, I'm not. And it's situations like that. But yeah, I just think one of our key problems in the industry, as we spoke about, is just this over-promotion doesn't allow people to use the skills that they've got, because they're now doing something that well out of their comfort zone. They're learning as they go. And you end up in a situation where people are calling themselves whatever, and they can't do that role. The pure essence of the role, whether it might be, I don't know, sales or commercial or finance, they might be unbelievable at that. But strategic thinking, mentoring, motivating, driving things forward, being a team player, maybe not great at that.
And so how does that get better? Is there, because there's levels of mentorship, right? Everyone can have a mentor above them. So we've kind of discussed your kind of, I guess, your exec chef kind of level mentors. So when you get to kind of that level, who's then the mentor above that? Where do you find your mentor? If you're already a hotel manager, or you're already a general manager in a hotel, and maybe there's...
I think that
how else... Is it peer-to-peer, or are you looking at...
I think it is. I think it doesn't have to necessarily be climbing up the hierarchy to find the next mentor. It can be the guy or girl next to you who presents a very different mindset to you, or a very, very different way of approaching things. And I think, obviously Graham and I were on the last podcast, and Graham and I were on the same level as directors of our last business. But I would say that Graham's sort of like a mentor to me, but primarily because of his temperament and his approach. Yeah. It's very, very calculated, experienced, calm, well thought through, well reasoned, etc., etc. That's something I can learn from, and we're on the same level. So I think that it doesn't have to necessarily be, climbing upwards. And I think that you can look at some of those things and think, actually, don't just look in one place for it. It can be in loads and loads of other places. Yeah. And also actually, these people can just be sounding boards for conversation. They really, really can. And I think, my an ex-chairman of Q Green, Jamie, he was sort of both him and Alex, the chairman and CEO. They'd been sounding boards for me after they've left. They're not going to give me a direction of where to go in my career or what to do, But both of them I've had conversations with them, both in the last 5 years, and they're like, don't do that, mate, or think about that, or what about this, or think about that, or it's not necessarily to say they are going to give you a direction to go and follow that to the letter. No, I don't think mentors do that. I don't think mentors do that. They give you options and advice and a bit of guidance.
Yeah.
But nobody's going to say, oh, tomorrow morning, go and apply to, McDonald's. And if you're really, really good, then I suggest you get promoted and go and work at Five Guys. And if you're really, really good, you get... No, they probably wouldn't say that. They'd probably say, think about these options. What do you want out of it? Because it feels like they're invested in you rather than, the career.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It sort of brings me back a little bit. We did for a while have quite a structured sort of mentor-mentee program in Starwood hotels, and that was more based on a sort of a peer-to-peer. It was really trying to avoid your own immediate network, and get to meet someone new. But it was always encouraged that would come from the mentee. It was led by the mentee. It was whatever you wanted to get out of it was what you needed to, come up with questions, or
Absolutely.
are you looking for access to other networks, or what is it that you're actually wanting to do yourself? And sometimes it's hard to know what you want yourself, because I personally I did a history and philosophy degree in university, and I kind of got a job in a bar, and then got a job in a hotel, and it kind of just went from there, and learning steps. There wasn't a structure to it that I recognized at the time, but it's quite a familiar one, and a lot of people did very similar things. And sort of just even knowing to have that structure of this is something you should consider. So if I was leading a team, I could say, well, find yourself another mentor, find yourself someone outside of the industry, whether it's even if it's a sort of a family friend of a friend,
Absolutely.
or whether it's networking. There's lots of great networking groups, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a mentoring networking group. No. It could be just any networking group, and it's share a business card, share a number, meet people on LinkedIn,
immerse yourself a bit.
Well, exactly. And anyone who does that, anyone who shows that passion for their own development, people love to be involved in that. And it also, if they're also just sort of asking questions, and we're all busy, right? We don't all have the time to sort of set aside hours in a week or a day. But if someone comes to you with specific questions and asking this and that, that's easy. That's something you're happy and passionate and want to help other people and answer the questions. But if they ask you to put together a presentation, a presentation, that's another thing altogether. That's going to be a lot more time needed investment on that, and especially if they are sort of not from your immediate. If they're not doing something for you that you need them to do.
I think you're so right with that sort of like, if you get, opportunities, networking opportunities, go and talk to somebody for 10 minutes, they give you that window. Any of those opportunities, we need to create and facilitate and encourage a culture that people take those opportunities and understand them and embrace them. And I think that, what you don't want to be doing as an industry, as an individual, as a manager, as a mentor, whatever, is clipping people's wings and saying, you're going to do a great job, but you're only really flying inside my nest. That's it. You're not going anywhere else. And I want you to be the best bird in this aviary, but actually, you're not leaving. And I'm going to make sure that I just trim you back every time you get a bit too, when actually we should be saying to people, I want to make you fly higher and stronger. I want to make you even better. And if you choose to go, then you choose to go. No dramas. But most of the time, I think people choose to stay. Because good people want to work with good people. Great people want to be encouraged by great people. And I think that is something that we need to understand and recognise, rather than this huge fear of almost allowing people to grow. Because we don't want to allow people to grow in case they overtake us or in case they're better than us. And I've experienced that myself, and I've had limitations put on my own career because people wouldn't allow me to grow. I genuinely think it was because they were worried about what might happen. And it's like the best mentors and the best leaders don't even think about that. They don't even worry about it. My two greatest mentors, Paul and James, I've gone to a level in the industry significantly higher than they have. that doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference to anything. You know, I saw one of them in January at his birthday, and, you know, he's still like my boss, you know, and that's just how it is. And you just think to yourself, it's not about that. It's about, you know, facilitating growth in people and helping people. And we found ourselves in a situation, I think, unfortunately, when people try and limit people growing because they're worried about what it means for them or what it might expose or anything like that. And we should be embracing it and saying, take a chance on these people, let them grow, give them some pathway to improve. It's the right way to go.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's certainly something for everyone to consider who's in a similar situation. Really encourage people to grow and develop, and you know, there's skills involved in that, but there's also that sort of pastoral understanding that you need to ask questions and get to know them and understand what makes them tick and what they're inspired by and what they're intrigued by, and maybe they'll be able to find that in your current business, or maybe they need to go outside and sort of explore a little bit more and learn and develop.
I'm pretty sure there's a name for this in terms of a management style, but all the stuff you just said is like the gold, right? Learn about them, what intrigues them, what gives them passion, what makes them motivated. If you can learn about that as you know, as individuals, your people will give you everything. They'll be the best they can be of themselves, best version of themselves. They'll be incredible. And I always think, you know, happy chefs, you know, are great chefs. They produce great work. And that's not something that needs to be a HR slogan. That's just a fact. If people come to work and they produce great food, it's probably because they're in a good place or whatever. And that applies to most jobs. And I think that if we can learn about what intrigues somebody, what makes somebody tick, what makes somebody happy, what's their passion, what do they want to do, where do they want to go, you know, have they just had a new baby, you know, all of those things. You know, you and I are both parents, and I think you can be in that situation where you say, have some empathy for people. You know, in those first 2 months of just having a newborn, it's pretty rough. You know, don't start, you know, laying it on thick because you haven't got any kids and you think that that's not a part of life that counts. Well, it does. Yeah. And I think that as an industry, we need to shake it up a little bit around that sort of stuff and offer something a bit better to our people, because then the whole pot will get better. And I think we need to be less down on each other, which I think happens a lot. But
those kind of key life moments, whether it's a child being born or going through grief or going through any sort of change, those are the bits where you remember everything else that happened as well, don't you? You kind of, you can go back, you can say, okay, I remember that month very, very clear. I remember everything.
And it's one of those, you know, I had a great boss once who was good at the empathy and all of that sort of stuff. I wouldn't say he was, you know, great at the business side, but he was great at the empathy and all of that sort of stuff. And I remember so clearly, for me, the day that my dad died. It was sort of early morning, probably about 10:30. And he said, oh, is everything okay? And I sort of explained to him what had happened. And he said, well, you must go now. You must leave now. You must leave work. And I had a chef's table in that night. And I said to him, I'm just going to stay at work, because this is the place where I can keep it together the most. This is the controllable for me. This is what makes me tick. And he's like, look, do whatever you want. If you want to disappear for a week, no problem. If you want to stay here and work for a week, no problem. And my way of doing that was just to stay at work and deal with it and just work through it and, you know, do what I enjoy. And that's it. But I think those sorts of people, rather than saying, by the way, Dean, HR policy is you have 48 hours of unpaid leave and then you have to come back to work because that's HR policy.
Yeah.
Forever, that person is going to then go, God, they really stuck it to me when I was having a really tough time. Do you know what I mean? And forever, you're going to remember that.
Yeah. And especially when new opportunities come along, they'll remember it when they have decisions
100%,
to make.
100%. That's just the way it goes. And I think that you always remember that sort of stuff. And really, financially, it costs nothing in the grand scheme of things. It costs nothing.
I've heard it a few times. The line, it will set a precedent.
Yeah.
And you might be right, maybe, but I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think there has to be flexibility because, as you say, everyone's different. And if you have a rule for everyone, yes, it might seem fair, but you also have to remember you will have occasions where your rule is this, and then someone will say exactly what you did, and they say, "Well, I'm going to just work through it," and then that all balances off. That balances off with the person who took 2 weeks off rather than a week off, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But it's almost trying to protect other members of the team sometimes, and forgetting that they are affected as well. If someone is treated badly, people talk, right? They share their experience and they say, look, this happened, this is what I was told, and they all go, wow, that's who I'm working for.
Yeah,
or,
exactly. Yeah,
or wherever it might be, and they're sharing those stories, and that is what creates a workplace culture,
exactly,
and not necessarily a good one.
And that culture is the win or the lose. And a guy who was in my old team, Q, he used to be basically he was the guy that opened all the Five Guys around Europe. So he would sign off on it and say they're all fully trained. And he said to me, that business isn't really about burgers. It's about culture. Mm-hmm. And he's like, everyone who works there loves working there. It's all amazing. And that cultural piece, I think like I said to you last time that was on the pod, like when I worked for Angela, it was a cultural moment in my life that I'll never forget, because I walked in the kitchen thinking, this is not like anything I've ever experienced in my life. The cultural change was mind-blowing, because it was at a time where chefs on TV were screaming and shouting, and aggression was something that was a trophy, and all of that sort of stuff. And this wasn't like that. This was a case of everyone in here would cut their arm off for the operation, for the environment, for the team, everyone. I'd never experienced that before. It was, and I couldn't tell you how she'd done it, but all I could tell you is the operation and the conduct in the kitchen was vastly different to anything I'd ever experienced. And I learned a lot from it. And I went back to my old job afterwards and sort of tried to behave a bit more like that, in terms of why is Suzanne upset today? Oh, it's because, her mum's really, really ill and she lives in Scotland and she can't get up there to go and see her, and we're in London, and so on and so on and so on. And, just to give her a bit of a break, if we have a 20-minute break, give her a 30-minute break so she can call her mum, etc., etc., etc. Just giving people a bit of slack, rather than saying, you're all the same, you're all robots, and we're going to treat you that way. It just can't work. It just can't work. So, the cultural piece is a big learning for our industry.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Dean.
No, thank you.
Great to chat on this and explore it further. We kind of knew when we were talking about it a few weeks ago that this needed a little bit more time, and I'm delighted that we got a chance to talk about it a little bit more. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to The Halo Effect, Hospitality Stories with Ashley and Michael Donald. We hope today's episode has offered some insights and encouragement to anyone navigating the world of hospitality or entrepreneurship. We'd love to hear from you. If you have a question, want to suggest a topic, or interested in just joining us as a guest, you'll find our contact details in the show notes. Don't forget to follow, like, or subscribe to The Halo Effect on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Until next time, thank you, and we can't wait to welcome you back for more stories and inspiration.